study session for facilities. Mr. Bailey?
Sure. I'd like to invite up to the podium first Mr. Jordan Aquino, our Assistant Superintendent for Business Services. Mr. Aquino.
Good evening, Board. Superintendent Bailey. As you guys know, it's been about 2 years since our last facilities needs study session. Last year, we had it on schedule for the same time, May, and that was canceled, obviously, due to the needs of the pandemic that we had to address. Tonight, we will have Patrick Cisneros, our Director of Facility Services. He's done an outstanding job with our modernization projects, managing our modernization projects and construction projects. And so he will go into depth a presentation that you will receive tonight. We want this to be more conversational. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to just ask that while we are presenting. So Patrick, you can take it out. We have about an hour. We have a lot of slides, so we'll try to be as quick and to the point as much as possible.
Thank you, Jordan. Good evening, Board and Superintendent. Thank you once again. I could not do what we do here for the Desert Sands Unified School District and the facilities program without a great staff. So I first have to thank my staff for their support, and also Mr. Aquino and Superintendent and Cabinet, and also the Board for supporting us as we navigate through the Measure KK bond program and other projects, capital improvement projects. But just want to give a shout out to our facility staff because they do a heck of a job and a lot of work over the last several years here. So with that being said, I'm going to get right into the agenda. We're going to be covering tonight Measure KK, the program overview. We're going to look at the timeline, Measure KK financial plan and state funding, Measure KK Phase 2 and Phase 3 progress, La Quinta High School baseball fields, an update, and then also some considerations. Also, we're going to look at some school facility needs, and then we're going to look at some next steps. And Jordan and I will tag team towards the latter part of this presentation. So to begin with, I'm going to give a Measure KK, the program overview. November 2014, the voters passed the bond of $225 million. That was done in 3 phases. Phase 1 was $75 million, which consisted of about 3 large projects, and then some safety, security, energy efficiency. And then also we had factored in there some construction administration, which is for all the staff, and also construction inflation, which is very, very key, because that's what helped us as we navigated through the program over the years. As we projected in the beginning in 2014, we had projected about a 4.5%, 5% inflation over the program, so over the life of the program for each phase. So that helped us as we navigated through the projects, and projects got designed and went to bid. We were able to deal with the actual cost because we had that construction inflation. And you'll see kind of how we navigated through that here in a little bit. Phase 2 was $100 million, which was in 2019 through 2022. That was 6 large projects, and then also some minor safety, security, and energy efficiency was set aside for that as well. Then we went on to the last phase, which was in 2022, which was about $50 million, and that has now, the board had approved Carter, Truman, and Adams on that last phase of the $50 million for the Measure KK bond program. So now we're going to look at the timeline here. So just looking at all the phases on this timeline, just want to share with you real briefly the gray bars. The gray bars represent kind of the design phase, which is typically around 9 to 12 months. And then you have anywhere from 60 or so days of bid and then award. And then you go into construction, which is the green bars. And then you have a few months of closeout. So that's what those represent as you kind of look at the chart, as you can kind of get a feel for of what projects are going and what's under construction right now. So there you can see in 2015, we had the first $75 million, and that was those projects are now completed. We moved on and got the $100 million in the second quarter of 2019. And we had those 6 projects are currently underway right now, and some of them are already completed. So Madison has restarted, and we're actually going to be presenting to award bids tonight at the board meeting. Kennedy is completed. Indio Middle School is completed. Lincoln Elementary School is going strong right now, coming out the ground. Ford Elementary School, the new construction, the new building is underway, and we're actually going to we opened bids today and recommending an award at the next board meeting, May 18th, for that project. And then also we have Monroe, which is in the final, just about almost the last part of that, and we'll share a little bit more about that project as we go through. And then we have the last phase, which was phase 3, which was $50 million. And you'll see there that the red bar represents when we got the funding, which was in the third quarter of 2020. But you'll see that that really wasn't slated until 2022. But we advanced that bond sale and maximized the market conditions. We're able to get a better interest rate, plus our financial condition was very, very positive. So I'm sure Jordan will share a little bit more about that as we get into the presentation. So you can see we advanced about a year and a half and moved some projects along very quickly there. And those are Carter and Truman, which are in the design phase right now. And we'll be looking to complete those around the end of 2023. So moving along, that just gives you a little snapshot of kind of where we are and kind of the bond sales of the whole $225 million there. Any questions? Okay, thank you. So now we're going to talk about the financial plan and plus look at a little bit of state funding. So here you're going to see a chart for phase 1, and you'll see the first column on the left is the budget for of all the projects that the board had approved for the first $75 million. Then you'll see the second column is Measure KK, which is the $75 million. And then you'll see we got some state funding. Also, for Oliphant, we didn't initially plan to, but we were able to contribute developer fees to help fund that project of about $16.7 million. So that was significant, and that allowed us to look at some other projects, deferred maintenance, as the program was moving along in the first phase. Overall, the last column shows you that we were really at about $81 million of phase 1, and we were able to still complete all those projects under phase 1 because of some of the contribution of other funds and also state funding.
Patrick, if I may, now we initially debated showing you this level of detail because when we throw a lot of numbers at you like that, it almost makes it really hard to digest. But the key thing to look at here is, now when we came up with a budget for these projects, that was done based on a facilities study session or master plan that was conducted in 2014. And as Patrick mentioned earlier, with initial estimates of about 4.5% of inflation. So you might see in some of these totals here, you'll see the budget and the Measure KK amount, and you'll see at the very end what that project actually ended up costing. And so that could be due to a number of factors, maybe changing the scope, some kind of a traffic light or something, or the inflation. As an example, sheet metal or what?
Plywood right now.
Plywood.
So as an example, plywood, just a simple an example, plywood could have cost anywhere from $15 to $20 a sheet a few years ago. And right now you're looking at about $50 to $70 a sheet. So you can see the drastic increase right now in wood and cost that we are experiencing. Sometimes it impacts us and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we're on the upside and sometimes we're on the downside. So that's why, as Jordan mentioned, Mr. Aquino mentioned that you will see some of the projects did have actual costs that ended a little bit higher than the initial budget. And that's why I mentioned in the beginning that the inflation was factored in to cover some of those costs when we got down to actually bidding the project. So I'm going to move on to phase, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So go back to that other side. We had 75 million budgeted, we spent 81, but we've got 18. Is there money left over from somewhere? And how much is it?
So the 18.5 was a part of developer fees, and then also we contribute some of our 40 fund. And then also, 40 fund, and then also you'll see the state funding. We did obtain about 2.8 million in state funding as well to help contribute towards.
Yeah, just to clarify, and I see where your mind is going on this, and that's trying to find a connection to expenses to the balance that's available for projects moving forward. This spreadsheet is not intended for that. But ultimately, those revenues are captured into the rest of the projects as we move forward through the presentation.
Okay. And then you'll see phase two. Phase two, which was the larger phase, again, the 100 million. We had broke that up into two phases of projects, really. And that was phase 2A and 2B. Those were Indio, Kennedy, Madison, Ford, Monroe, and Lincoln. As you can see there, the initial budget was 100 million. Again, Measure KK, all of the funding Measure KK we had was 100 million. But in addition to that, as Mr. Aquino mentioned, we did roll down any excess that we had from the first phase into these projects as well to keep us within the overall budget of the bond, and any additional funds that we were able to contribute is what helped complete the projects. So you look over, again, we added about 2.6 million in other funding, and then also we had some budget revisions, so it all kind of shook out to about 117 million for phase two is what we're projecting right now to wrap up those projects. Moving on to phase three is the last phase, which is 50 million, and those are the Adams, Carter, and Truman. Again, some minor energy efficiency, construction administration, and inflation is in there as well. You can see that we have already made some adjustments with other funding based on the current cost of construction. Just to remind everybody that the original budgets and Measure KK column was from 2014. So we're now 2021, so we update our budgets as we go along, and we use that inflation to move that and cover the current costs right now.
Right, so just in summary also is that at the end of the day, we had a $225 million bond. We did expend, oh, here, a perfect summary on that. Patrick, actually, I'm stealing your thunder. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So we had a $225 million bond. We used, the total project was around $252 million. We used some of our developer fees to help offset those costs and exhausted a lot of our inflation budget that we had built into it to compensate for any increased costs as the projects move down the line. In addition to that, in the phase three, as was listed earlier, you do see a budget for Adams for about $7 million. Now, originally, when the board did the facilities master plan, Adams was an occupied site with students. And so we are still maintaining a $7 million budget in there, and we're doing that for a couple reasons. One, we do have Adams needs that needs to be addressed to be program compliant with our programs that we have there currently, restrooms, those types of things. And in addition to that, if we get into a position where we are going to need to compensate some of the other projects, as an example, Carter or Truman as an example, if inflation or some unforeseen costs, we will be able to use that as an available balance to help offset those costs. At the end of the day, when we get to the end of the presentation, you will see, excuse me, I'm sitting down. You will see, now I just lost my train of thought. You will see that available balance that the board, we will show you what that available balance is, and at the next study session, look at whatever balance is available from the Adams projects once we get further down the line with completing the other two that were talked about in phase three.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Aquino. Okay, moving on now to state funding. Just real quick, want to give an overview of state funding and how that works. So the state funding program is a 60-40 match for modernization and 50-50 match for new construction. We are looking to capture as much modernization dollars because that's most of our projects, and that's what we're eligible for. So for the first phase, in addition to that, it's about your school facilities have to be 25 years old or older. And then also it's based on, the grant is based on enrollment and how many classrooms you have at the site too. So those are the factors that come into play when you're eligible for state funding. So of the first phase, we had Hoover and La Quinta Middle School, which were eligible. We did have Roosevelt Seismic, which is on there, but that budget for that site was adjusted to cover some of the active projects that were in construction, as we've seen costs before they go out to bid inflate a little bit. So we were able to cover those projects and complete those. Of the projects that were eligible, Hoover and La Quinta Middle School, we went ahead and submitted, and we did receive about 2.9, which you've seen on the sheet, on the spreadsheet there, of funds. You will see another column, which is the bond authority column, and that is where the state is currently at right now. They're in a position called beyond bond authority. They have no more bond authority, no more funding available. So every school district that has eligibility submits their applications as if they do, and they get an order by date stamp. And then as soon as the state has funds available, they're able to release those funds, and school districts apply based on their time in line.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on that exact thing, what Patrick's referring to is when he's talking about the bonds and the 75 million, when the beyond bond authority is the state's bonding authority. So what we do as a district is look at the projects, we look at the ages of our schools, and we modernize projects where we know we could ultimately get the best bang for our buck. Because we could modernize any project that we want in the school district, but we are looking at projects based on their age and their ability for state matching funds. Because we could do anything, potentially not get a state match, but what Patrick's showing here on the funds received is we are targeting projects that have an additional benefit where the state will reimburse us for the expenses as that we are incurring.
So moving on to phase 2, which was the 100 million, we had Madison, Kennedy, Indio Middle School, Lincoln, Ford, and Monroe. All those schools are eligible. And 3 of the schools have been, applications have been submitted to the state, and 3 of the other schools are in process right now and will be submitted this year. You will not see them hit the funds received, but you will see them go to the Beyond Bond Authority list at the state level.
And just to add, so those numbers on the right that we have listed there, we have not received yet, but when the state does submit more bonds, we will be in line for those additional funds to the district.
And there's no like statute of limitations where like we're 5 years out and they still haven't got their authority and we get cut out. Like, we're just in the queue waiting. Theoretically, we could wait like 7, 8 years and then it could be our turn. We're still going to get that money.
Absolutely, unless the program changes, unless they make a change to the program. But other than that, we're in line, and we've done everything to where our applications are accepted, and then they review them. As long as we comply and our applications are accepted as complete, then we're in line, 100% ready to receive. Moving along to the final phase, phase 3, which was the 50 million. You had Adams, Carter, and Truman. Of those projects, you had Carter and Truman, which are eligible, and we're preparing those applications right now, as I mentioned, and those 2 will also go to the Beyond Bond Authority list, which is at the end of the day, we're looking at capturing an estimated amount of $24.5 million in state funding, based on the projects that we are doing, which are eligible for state funding.
Yeah, just to add to that, when we plan and do the facilities master plan, and we come up with our consultants as far as our financing plan, we do not assume in our project budgeting any state matching funds. So we consider everything that we have based on what we have control over, and then any state matching funds that we receive, as Mr. Griffith was mentioning, will come in after the fact and would be ultimately a bonus to the district with regard to our facility needs.
And that funding that the district does receive is used on like projects. So very similar projects to the ones that were applied for and received the funding.
That money is only to be used for like projects?
Correct.
It cannot be used for anything else?
Correct.
Okay.
And we will go through a state audit, et cetera, when we're done spending the money. Any questions?
I already asked. They said no.
What's that? What's that?
Just kidding.
Oh. That's a good chunk of change. I mean, I understand it's not all going to come in at once. It'll just trickle in whatever project is in there, but it's guaranteed whenever they get the bonding.
If the state goes out for a bond and,
Right.
and
If those
we have
funds
to
become
pass it, yeah.
available, then wherever we are,
yeah.
so they'll trickle in. All
We've
right.
done our due diligence as a district to make sure that we've done all that we can to get in line, get in order so that we can receive funding if it ever becomes available.
And I do know, because I sit on California School Board Association, and we've discussed this, and we're lucky because there are a lot of districts that have not gotten any funds at all. So, kudos to you. But I do know that we're putting a lot of pressure on Sacramento, letting them know that there are many of us that have put out the funds, and we're looking at getting that money back to help us because, as you said, there's a cost of living that goes up, and so wages go up, everything goes up every year. So we have a certain amount of money, and if we spent it at that exact same time, we would have been perfect. But you can't do all your projects all at once. You have to scatter them throughout, over a period of years, which then ends up costing us more money because we're having to pay higher prices for sheet metal, for wood, or nails,
wood,
or even salaries. For the minimum wage, raising the minimum wage, all of that's going to impact our projects. So, thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next part of the agenda, we're going to look at Phase 2 and Phase 3 progress. And this was the $100 million, so we're going to look at Madison, Kennedy, Indio, Lincoln, Ford, and Monroe. You have 3 of those projects now complete, and 3 of them are under construction right now heavily, and one, Monroe, will be wrapping up the end of this summer, coming up this year. So just quickly, looking at Kennedy Elementary School, which I believe most of you are familiar with, we demolished the existing buildings that were there, identified in red. We added interim housing portables, and then we built new classroom buildings and a new administration building to replace those old outdated buildings. There's what that site now looks like from an aerial perspective, and then moving along, there's some of the completed photos of the facilities there. So looking really nice, and we were glad to turn this over at the start of the school year for Kennedy Elementary School. And there's a perspective of how that campus looks now. Moving along into Indio Middle School was just a modernization, complete modernization of all the interior spaces and buildings at this campus. And that was done in 3 phases, and it went from August 2019 to August 2020. Along with that, we did some interior improvements, technology upgrades, got through all the facilities there, locker room, kitchen, and then we painted the exterior and refreshed that campus with a new color, and there's some of the images there. We moved on to Madison Elementary School. We know that is now restarting now, and we have demolished the 2 kinder buildings, and we will be building 2 new kindergarten buildings and modernizing the rest of the remainder of the buildings on campus there. And there's just a perspective with the 2 kindergarten buildings there with the 2 yellow arrows, identifying the 2 new kinders, and that gives you a perspective of how the campus is going to be refreshed once it's all completed and painted with the new buildings there. Moving on to Lincoln right now, which is under construction. That's similar to Kennedy. That has the red buildings identified in red as being demolished. That will take place next, not this coming summer, the following summer of 2022. And then we are currently building the new administration, new kinder, and new classroom buildings, and we'll show you that in just a minute. The existing buildings that will remain on campus are the MPR, which is a multi-purpose room, the library, and that horseshoe-type classroom building that was recently built in about 2010 or so. So there's some perspectives. The E's, circles with the E, identify the existing buildings, and then you see the buildings along Portola Road, and then the administration is up in the front along Magnesia Falls on the corner there. There's a little perspective of walking into the administration building and what that's going to turn out looking like, and then they're standing in the courtyard now of the new, what will be the new classroom area, the courtyard of the new classrooms, looking to the north out to Magnesia Falls. To the left of the orange building is, the other side of the orange side of the building is the Portola Avenue. And there's some of the construction pictures that are underway. The new buildings are expected to be completed in August of 2022. So that's when we'll be starting to demolish the existing campus and then move on from there, so we can then move everybody over and demolish the building. So there's some updated photos of what's happening over there right now. Monroe is under construction right now, and Monroe was done in about is going to be done in 4 phases. The first 3 phases, actually, the interim housing and the blue and the green are completed. We are currently in the pink, which is the center of the campus, completing those classrooms right now, and then we will move into the yellow over the summer, and then that project will be completed at Monroe Elementary School. And there's just some few pictures of the existing classrooms being renovated, with the pictures of the actual conditions of the new classrooms refreshed on the lower portion of the page. Going on to Ford Elementary School, we have a campus-wide modernization, plus we're going to be adding a new classroom building and new kindergarten building there to replace the old portables, which are identified in red. And here's some of the perspective of the new classroom building that is alongside of Fred Waring. This is the front side, inside of the campus perspective. And that's how that's going to look. This is the building that will be replacing the portable classrooms that are out there. Here's some of the progress. So you can see how things are moving along out there. And then the lower portion is the kindergarten building, which is by the administration office, that little drive entrance, the loop right there into the parking lot. This building's expected to be completed in July of 2021, all these buildings. And then, like I had mentioned, we'll be recommending award of bids May 18th, and then we'll move right into the modernization phase as soon as summer starts. And that will go on through the next summer as well, 2022. So we're now into phase 3, which is the final $50 million of Carter and Truman. And just to give you some perspective of what's going to be taking place at those campuses, Truman is a campus-wide modernization. Truman does have 2 administration buildings, because I believe in the past it was 2 schools combined into 1. So we actually are able to maximize our modernization funds. And what we're doing there is we worked with the site to support their program, and we're converting one of the administration buildings into a makerspace. So we're able to do that, and then we'll shift everybody over to the one administration building, where the single point of entry is to the campus. So there's just a perspective of what that site's going to look like. We're also giving that site a refreshed look, so you can see some of the new color schemes. We're covering some of the existing block with some wood facade, just to give you some with a plank type of exterior facade, to really give that site a facelift as well. And this is the west side perspective, but actually the signs and everything will be on the east side, where we're going to actually make that the complete admin, and this will be converted to the makerspace side. So give you that. Moving on to Carter. Carter is going to have a new classroom building plus campus-wide modernization. The gray represents the modernization of the existing campus, and that white long building on the right side of the page is the actual new building, which currently there's portables there right now. So we'll be removing all those portables and installing and building a new classroom building there. And just to give you some perspective where that looks and how that's going to be placed, there's kind of an aerial view with that blue building. That blue is the new building. We still will have 3 portables out there for the campus right now, as things stand right now. Any questions?
So you said there'll still be portables on the Carter campus. You can't, we just didn't have the funds to extend it so they have classrooms over there.
Correct. One of them is a YMCA, and then the other is kind of a shared space that they use dual purposes. But we're building enough classrooms to support their boundaries and enrollment.
And as far as the portables that are there, they're extremely old. Is there any movement to replace them for newer portables? I don't know if we can. I just know they're in very poor shape over there.
Are you talking to the YMCA?
Yeah.
I think those
I believe the YMCA actually owns those.
Yeah, those are owned by
okay.
YMCA.
So we would, I'd have to check. I believe they own those, and if they do, we wouldn't be replacing them.
So we need to tell the YMCA to replace them.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
When I was on Kennedy last week, I noticed that I guess some classrooms were built a little earlier than the last little phase of long ones, and those rooms are a little bit smaller even than the other ones. Is there any look to the, well, we've already done all of our schools by now, but back when things were built 20 to 1, it just seems like we could or should look, any future buildings that take into account that we need a little more room in classrooms. They're just so small.
So well, let me start with this. All of our classrooms are based on a state standard of classroom size. That's also what's necessary for us to achieve our state funding as well. So we have to meet that minimum square footage,
Right.
which is based on which is based on how many students will be in that classroom. So right now, those buildings that are existing at Kennedy were built, I believe, between 2009 and 10, and they're similar size. And we also went in and we took out some of the old style of casework, which had the long island in front of the teacher, so that we can now have that flexible furniture just like the new buildings we built. So we're
Right.
doing that at that campus. We're doing that at all of our campus. We're going in and renovating to make sure that we're maximizing as much space as we can in those classrooms.
I'm not talking about the ones built in 2009 and 10, but yet the ones that were just finished
Okay.
in the last year. There was a length of building I was touring, and those rooms are considerably smaller. I realize the state has a minimum. Do we build to the minimum?
We don't build to the exact minimum. Sometimes we're just a little bit larger than that, but that's pretty much the standard across the district.
Because I know when the class sizes get larger to the older grades, usually 4th and 5th, and we have 33 to 35 kids in a room, that's where, the problem exists. So I don't know, forward thinking, I wish, I taught back in 95 in Jackson, and the room was huge before that was modernized. I remember it was just a big room with tons of storage and everything. That was back in the old days, I guess, but anyway, it was visibly smaller, so I just commented on that. But I loved going around and seeing schools like Indio Middle and La Quinta Middle and everything that I remember from 10, 15 years ago. And they just make a kid want to be so proud of their school, Indio High School. It was just so nice to see all the refreshing colors, and the rooms and the equipment is so updated and everything. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Now we're going to get into the Quinta High School baseball fields updates and some considerations. This is from the last study session. So what I'm going to be showing you tonight is just some basic information on this slide about the overall campus. So general information, the campus was built around 1994. Number 2, you can see that as identifying the varsity and JV baseball fields. Number 3 is the access from within the campus. So you can see how you can get to those fields from the campus. And then parking is located on the east side of the football stadium, where the 4 is labeled in that parking lot. Just to kind of go back and kind of identify a few things here. What we're addressing here, based on the last study session, is access to the field and orientation. So that was one of the things that the board had asked us to go back and study. So we went out and we hired an architect, and we did a study, and that's what we're presenting to you tonight. So,
Yeah, I just want to add, when we had the last study session 2 years ago, and we were talking about available funding, the board expressed an interest to look at the La Quinta High School baseball fields, and that is what we were bringing back to you. 2 years later, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, and not having the meeting last May, we are showing those options to the board now.
So this is looking at, again, the access to the fields. Again, so just a little closer look at the fields there. You can see public access is identified around the football stadium, the north side of it. Service access is kind of off of Black Hawk Way. There's a drive approach, but then it's kind of dirt and grass going into the fields. School access, again, comes from the south side of the stadium. And then the parking lot, again, is located to the east. So and here's just some pictures of the service areas and then the public access. You can kind of get a visual of kind of where people go in from service to service. Trucks are going in, and then where public accesses the fields from the outside of the campus. Now, here again, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the fields. This right here is just an overview of the orientation of the fields, the baseball fields, the JV and varsity. So the ideal situation for a baseball field is for if you were to strike a line from home plate to the pitcher's mound, you would be going through the northeast direction. That is what is the ideal orientation and safest orientation for a baseball field. So you can see here that La Quinta High School's, their varsity is faced northwest, and then the JV is in the ideal orientation going northeast. And then we did some analysis, just looked at some of our other high schools across the district, and you can see that Palm Desert High School, their varsity is northeast, their JV is northeast. Shadow Hills High School, their varsity is northeast, the JV is northwest. Indio High School, their varsity is northeast, JV is northeast. So just wanted to give you kind of some perspectives of what we have across the district when it comes to the orientation of the ball fields.
That has to do with the benefit for the pitcher and the batter.
From the eyes, the sun, exactly, yeah. Yeah. So here is option A, and this option, again, I'm not giving you, I'm not going to present an option in priority. I'm just label them A, B, and C, just with some different scenarios for us to consider. Option A, this approach looks at access over orientation. So number one, we're looking at the option of adding a pedestrian crosswalk, because a lot of people are parking on the north side of the high school in the park parking lot and crossing the street. There is also already a pedestrian crosswalk to the east a little bit more into the parking lot. But then also it looks at enhancing the service and access ramp, making that more usable, and actually formally paving that. And then you can see there, number 3 is a pedestrian sidewalk from the football stadium all the way over to the access ramp and now down into the baseball fields. Project costs for this are about $850,000. If you do add the crosswalk, that's another $225,000. You're looking at a little bit over $1 million for this option here, which addresses access versus orientation. Option B is actually orientation over access. So you have the same pedestrian crosswalk, you have an access ramp now identified with number 2, and a stairway at the access point along Black Hawk Way. So where everybody's currently accessing, which is an access ramp, that will become stairs and an entryway down into the stadiums. It also installs the pedestrian sidewalk still from the football stadium, so it gives you another option in to the baseball fields. And then this one flips the baseball fields to the north side of the property. This has a project cost of about $8.3. If you add a pedestrian crosswalk, you're looking at about $8.5 million for this option here. Option C is a balance of the orientation and access. Again, you have the pedestrian crosswalk, you have service and access ramp only with no stairway, and then that pedestrian sidewalk is still installed. And then you have here where we flip the varsity to the ideal orientation. That cost, go ahead.
Just looking at C, what is there a way you could put parking up the left field line to create handicap access where you wouldn't even have to walk on a ramp, just walk?
In that little corner there?
Yeah, if you look at Palm Desert Field, they have the parking information now. But you know, if we're looking at handicap access, we could put some handicap parking there along Adams and kind of alleviate the walkway issue, with handicap parking there.
Yeah, I'm sure we can explore those options as well.
All right. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. We're just getting down to the cost here. The cost.
To identify projects which included the baseball fields. So The purpose of this slide is to show you how we've had to dip into those funds that we had available from the last time we met due to things like inflation or project costs being more than what we anticipated. And so you can see here the Madison modernization project cost an additional $2.1 million. If you say, well, why did it cost an additional 2.1? We did tear down the kindergarten building and are building a new one there, which we didn't originally have as part of the plans went for that school. And you could see the additional costs at the other projects there. So ultimately, an additional $5.6 million that we've had to dip into those funds that were originally presented to the board with a $15 million balance. Go to the next slide. So with that being said, and in looking at the projects that we allocated from the last facilities study session, we had in there the high school track and fields. We've added in here a consideration for the Monroe portables as a replacement, because I know there's been some requests or interest in that. The La Quinta High School baseball fields allocating 8.5, and then the DEC single point of entry. I think we showed that on the where we would put a like a partition or a
Close this off right here.
close this off right here before you get to the front desk. And then the press box improvements over at Indio High School and Palm Desert High School. So we're showing you here, if you want to keep going, Patrick. Oh, no, go back. The start dates of what that would look like if we move forward with the previous board's direction from 2 years ago to completing these projects. Now, we are behind because originally from the last presentation that we showed, I think the only thing that we showed that we would have been starting at this point were the track and fields. Right. But we were concerned with some of the inflation of what we would need, and we were exploring with Gabe here in the back what that would, if we weren't going to do the Indio High School track and fields to the whole infrastructure, because that $1.5 million includes some of the irrigation, we were looking at an option to just do a resurfacing of the track and fields, and that was going to be a $300,000 cost. But we feel we also have the available funds to do that, the full-blown project, which ultimately would last us from eight years with just a normal resurfacing to about 15 years with fixing the irrigation there as well. So just to throw it out there, if we look at things like adding the parking structure, at the end of the day, it will dip into these available balances. And so we might have to figure out or reprioritize what are some areas that we might have to reconsider if we add the parking, as an example, at La Quinta High School, and it costs, everything costs, the crosswalk costs $225,000. I don't know what adding the parking would be. Next one.
We went with the option C. We could save $3 million there on the baseball fields from 8.5 down to 5 something.
Without touching the varsity.
Yeah, without going to the JV fields. So that's not what we are proposing, but yes, if we went with option C and just address the high school field, that would be the cost estimate. Next slide.
I just want to ask a question. So on for the press box improvements for Palm Desert and Indio, I know that that's been like a sore spot for me for Indio High School's press box, which is, been there since 1969, I think. Anyway, and one of the things that was always brought up was that it had to be ADA compliant. So would this make that, if you were to do these improvements, would that address that?
Yes, we're looking at at just the press box though, and making that accessible, not going into the bleachers, because that cost will just continue to compound and increase. So we're projecting if we can just stay within the press box footprint, then that's what our budget estimates are right now. But if it continues to grow and expand out of that area, then we could see the cost significantly go up.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that I thought, because I know that if you tore down all of the bleachers, I mean, it would be an crazy amount of money, but my understanding was that you couldn't just do the press box, that you had to in order to make it ADA compliant, you had to actually go expand out. So I'm happy to see this. I'm happy to see that we would be able to actually address the press boxes in those two schools. So, anyway, thanks.
And there's been, I know when you talk about Indio High School, the bleachers have not always been in the best condition. Have all the repairs been done so they're adequate, so we don't have to worry about a problem there? And if we replace the press box down the line, let's say in 4 years from now, we're looking and we're saying, you know, the bleachers are just in bad shape. What does that mean as far as the press box is concerned? I mean, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, at the end of the day, if we were going to do consider a whole bleacher replacement, that might invalidate not invalidate, but the cost of replacing it now would also ultimately be foregone.
Yeah. We would do our best to try to salvage as much as possible, obviously, and not get into too much of the.
The other thing is, I know that right now, and I'm not sure for the other high schools, but I know Indio High School really doesn't have wheelchair accessibility, because that's one of the issues that we have with graduation, is that people are out on the field in wheelchairs. And so, you know, to me, that's really important, so.
Yeah, you know, we're bringing in it because, you know, that's what we originally talked about the last meeting, but we also have a deferred maintenance need, because addressing it now will be better for us, at least for the short term, because we still, if we didn't replace it, we still have deferred maintenance needs with regard to the roofing, and I think those estimates were around 60,000, I would say. I don't recall exactly, but either way, we are going to be putting money into that.
Does that include that outside blue wall that is like crumbling, and you see this beautiful new school, and then the wall on Clinton is, I think that was there since when Linda graduated. So it's.
Yeah, our current budget is for the actual footprint of the actual
Okay, it
press
doesn't
box.
cover that.
Yeah, we're just going to continue to.
The thing is about that blue wall, it's like Napa Auto Parts. You know, to me, you know, why don't we match the blue that is the same blue that's at Indio High School? I've never understood that, why that can't happen. How much is a couple gallons of paint, for crying out loud? You know, so, I mean, and I don't know what the deal is with that, but I mean, it's deteriorated, anyway. But that's.
Kind of it covered that, but it didn't. You're saying no. Okay. And I have a comment. I know it's not on here, and that might be somewhere else, another project already slated to go, but I wanted to ask about the Indio High School greenhouse.
Yes, so we didn't include this because it's not going to be a project funded through Measure KK or state matching funds, but we have been working with Ed Services on a financing plan for that will not include these funds. That's why it's not part of this presentation.
Okay, but it's still a go.
I don't want to speak for the group, but we are working with them on coming up with a plan to finance it and to put it into works.
Okay, because I heard a go. Did you hear a go?
I
got it. Thank you.
And since Anna kind of put her foot kind of in that door, I do have a question, because I know over at Ford Elementary, it's one of the only schools that does not really have covered cafeteria area. It's like these funny slats where the kids are in the sun. I mean, they don't have the actual covered area in the cafeteria area. I don't believe it's being addressed right now with our KK funds. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Is there some way that we can address that without, in other funding ways?
So that's a perfect segue into this.
Okay.
So the reason for this slide is what we're showing is in addition to those needs that you have all expressed, we are showing where the new needs for our schools and where they fall in line with that. As we mentioned, anything 25 plus years, we're trying to maximize the funding on. So you could see here, or actually,
That was KK.
Okay, I'm sorry, next one. Okay, so just real quick, that last slide shows all the project costs and the amount of money that we are applying for in state matching, yellow that we've received already. The next slide is showing where we're at with regard to the next round of school site needs and the funding potentially that would be necessary in order to fund the minimum project cost for that. So I know we're pressed for a little bit of time and not to get into the details as to how those are calculated, but at the end of the day, if we address these needs in the district, we're looking at a state share for that, assuming that there's a facilities bond passed by the state. So you can see, you know, we have Lyndon B. Johnson, La Quinta High, Carry-On, Carrillo, Earhart, Jackson, John Glenn, and Page.
And these were projects that were not addressed by Measure KK and are in order of state funding based on year built and eligibility. And then you see to the far right column, you would see that's what the 2014 master plan had as estimates for each of the projects. So you can see that the district share overall for all of these projects are about 30 million. State shares about 45, and the minimum project cost would be 76. However, if you look at 2014 and then we were to update those costs to 2021 costs, you would see we'd be well over $110 million just to complete these 8 projects.
So just to add to that, this 2014 master plan is exactly that, 2014 plan. We are looking at doing an updated plan, facilities master plan. That will be around a 6-month process. So we want to update our facilities master plan to show the board where we are at, what our facilities needs are, what the potential costs of those would be. Just as a heads up, obviously we would work with our financial advisor to provide you with the current market conditions, strategies as to how we would go about addressing any of these facilities needs or any additional needs that the board is bringing up. We have a great rate in the district with our bonds. Our bonding capacity right now, I think we're at about $660 million of available bonding. So our capacity is at, I think, $1 billion, and we have available capacity of 660. So what we wanted to do on the next coming board meeting is bring our financial advisor just to talk to you about how we can go about addressing some or any future needs that the board may have.
They make sure that when they do that, I know a big important thing was when we passed the last bond, is that what was nice is that the payments didn't increase for the people that were paying on the bond. It did extend it a little longer, but there were no increases. So I think that we would appreciate something like that, you know, in looking at a future bond, that we don't want to have our communities spending a lot of money on their property taxes. So.
Question on number 7, Andrew Jackson. It was built in 1956. Was it renovated in 81 or 2002?
Correct.
Is that what that?
Correct. And then they were next year eligible. It would be 2027. So they already went after the state funding back in 2002, 81, and we captured any additional availability in 2002. And then we don't have no more eligibility until 2027.
So 6 more years, okay.
And I have one more question. It's Eisenhower. We're using it in a different capacity. What's going on with that? Do we need to update that facility because of what we're going to be doing, but will we capture it through the CTE funds, and so we don't have to worry what is going on with that, or do we have to, again, look at that as something that we need to use bonding funding?
Yeah, so, I mean, that could be a consideration whether we flex on the available funding that we have, because I'm not sure exactly what the scope of updating the ECE site would be. We've applied some minimal dollars to make sure that we could get some things going, some of the programs there started, but to overall modernize the site, we do not have anything in place for that right at this time.
I can have Dr. Vollmer provide you something in the Friday letter, where we are, status.
That's it. That's it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great job.
And I certainly appreciate the hard work Patrick and Jordan, that you guys do to actually keep all this together. Thank you.
Patrick deserves all the credit for that.
Going to recess into closed session, but at this time, does anybody want to make any public comment on our closed session items? Okay, hearing none, we'll go into recess we'll go into closed session at, I can't see the time. What time is it? 6:35. 6:35.
Jordan and Patrick, thank you.